Well, good day, good afternoon, good morning to all. Welcome to another episode of an Arcus podcast. PJ O'Neill, my partner in crime, is also with us. He'll take us to the next step and where we're going from here.
You're listening to the Arcus podcast, which is managing your perimeter. This is our fourth, I believe, Mel, correct?
Yep.
This is our fourth installment. And Arcus Group, for those of you who don't know, who are new to this podcast, we are an event production management and perimeter security specialist firm. We consult, we build some of the largest perimeters to keep your patrons and gear and performers and whoever else safe. Keep the bad guys out, keep the good people in.
That is exactly correct. And we've been fortunate to participate in some of the biggest events domestically, a lot of them in the political sphere, but we are not political. With that, I'd like to introduce Mario Daigle, who is with us today. And Mario, if you want to take a few minutes and have your own shameless plug time, now's the best time to do that.
All right. Thanks, guys. So, yeah, my name is Mario Daigle. I'm Canadian. I should say A, because, that's what you do.
I'm sorry, A?
Well,
Canadian
you also told us that you've got roots in Louisiana, so shouldn't it be like A, y'all?
Maybe, but I think those part of the dialects kind of got evolved in those parts of the world. So like I told you before, I've actually never been there, which is insane. I've got to fix that. But it's true. I am an Acadian, which is the same descendants as Cajuns. So I have cousins in Louisiana who I have to visit soon. But I am Canadian, East Coast of Canada. Currently live in Nova Scotia. I am part of a company that recently got acquired. I guess 2 years ago. Is not that recent anymore. But we built a technology to detect insider threats using advanced analytics. So we are one of those artificial intelligence companies using machine learning to try to help do what PJ, you said earlier, you guys do, which keep the bad guys out and people inside safe. So part of our mission as we build this technology is to find bad actors before they could cause damage. We like to find bad guys with math. That's one of our taglines that I actually enjoy. I think it's pretty cute. It's pretty cool. But it is true. It's kind of what we do. So we were acquired by a company called Micro Focus that owns another set of products called ArcSight. So my company was called Interset, myself and a number of others who kind of built it up. We built the technology acquired by Micro Focus, who owns ArcSight. ArcSight is a cybersecurity product that sort of defined a specific subspace of that industry. Its role is to help security operations groups, security operations centers, identify where those threat actors are, identify hacks that have come in. You've heard of malware. You've heard of, machines that need to be patched because they've been compromised. Finding those things is what a security operations center does. And our software helps those people. So that's what we did. And before then, I was part of a company called Cognos out of Ottawa. It was acquired by IBM, became part of the Watson Group, doing analytics. So my background, until I joined this company about 7-8 years ago, before then I was my career was all analytics. I grew up surrounded by math geeks, kind of learning what they can do and what math can do, what analytics can do when deployed properly, how it can help humans make better decisions. And so I joined this company because I thought it'd be cool to see what we could do about getting math to help security operations find bad guys.
And I would just say at this time, my best math move is grabbing my calculator. So,
you know what? That's mine too.
Yeah,
I'm surrounded by mathematicians. I know what it can do, but listen, you got to use the tools around you. That's what makes you powerful.
That's absolutely right. It's fascinating. I've been on your website. We'll also link it on our podcast site. But it really is fascinating to see some of the stuff that you guys are involved with.
Well, and you know what? I think for our listeners out there, you might be asking yourself, what does data analytics have to do with you event monkeys? You guys sling steel and put bike rack up and put out, traffic cones to make sure people are going in the right direction. Well, as you know from our previous episode, we're talking COVID. And this episode is titled, is part of our COVID files, and it's what does the data tell us? And Mario is, on a team, and they're looking at what is going on with the data, the variants, the vaccines, and if you could tell us a little bit about that and kind of where we are in general, we'd love to hear your insight.
Yeah,
just so we're clear here, I don't want this to become a mask discussion, but because that's what everybody else is talking about. So
yeah. No, I wasn't going to bring up masks.
Oh, good.
So, like you said, PJ, I'm surrounded by mathematicians. We have a data science team. They're pretty passionate about what they do, and they're particularly passionate about doing work that matters. So it was interesting when this whole thing started just over a year ago. It's amazing. There's been over a year now. Is they started to look at
ever.
Oh, no kidding. They started to look at the data that was emerging. And anytime you think about an analytic application, something that uses math to get to some kind of answer, you always need good data, right? And good data is hard to get in many instances, but it's really, really hard to get when the situation you're trying to analyze is emerging. So when that happens, you've got, teams that will take the data and then, do extensive work to clean the data, shape it, and then build models where you can predict. So they started to get more information in. They started to collect data from different sources that were publishing it in the open source community for the purpose of crowdsourcing, projections and predictions and trying to help us all make better decisions. And it's really hard at first because everyone's working with incomplete data. So as an example, if you're trying to figure out...
I don't mean to interrupt your answer, but weren't you also faced with the fact that this is not something that we've ever experienced in our lifetimes, a pandemic like this? How did you figure out which data mattered?
Yeah. So, there's a number of factors there, but you're looking for reputable sources. You're generally looking for the crowds. It's like anything else. If you're in a conference and you want to see what the really good vendors are, the really interesting vendors, you're looking for the crowds.
Yeah.
So which data sources are attracting the most participants, and then that inertia typically starts to take off. So you start to see people gather around the same piece of content and contribute to it. So then you get clusters that start to form, and that's very organic. It's you can almost think of it as kind of its own living being, and you start to see certain, like I can't rhyme them off the top of my head, but we've got probably 4 or 5 specific data sources that we use because they've done a really good job at aggregating clean data and making sure that it stays clean, doesn't get polluted, because that's really important. So once you start to get a little bit of data, then you can start to look at things like, infection rates. Where are, geographies spiking? Where are infections, cranking up more than you would expect or less than you would expect? Then you start to look for, what are the differences between those different geographies, and what are the measures that have been put in place that have an impact on transmission rates. And so over time, over the past year, they've expanded the application. They built an application. If you do Microfocus COVID forecast, you'll see it. It's really cool. We don't charge for it. It was really a labor of love from our data scientists. We use it for marketing, kind of showcases the depth of our data science, but it's not a revenue generator or anything like that. But effectively, over time, when they've been able to sort of identify different measures, different inputs into the data, it becomes more and more interesting. So now we're starting to see the effect of vaccinations. And I'm personally watching that very carefully because that, to me, is the biggest predictor of when I can expect lockdowns to end. We just started one here like 2 days ago.
Just started a lockdown?
We did, because our infections, we were almost at 0 infections, and then we got a spike from one of the variants. And of course, those spread like wildfire. So we went from 40 cases province-wide out of over 1 million people to 400 in 4 days. So right away, really, really quick. So I'm watching to see what are the effects of vaccinations on transmission rates. In other words, what's the percentage of people that have to have at least one shot so that I can start to expect to see infection rates go down, all other things being equal. that's the next piece of data that I'm looking for. And I do feel like, at least here, I feel like it's that darkest period just before dawn.
Right.
Like this is probably the most severe lockdown that this province has seen, because by and large, this particular province, Nova Scotia, has kept infections down to almost zero throughout the pandemic. So whereas the rest of the continent was in different forms of lockdown or had infection rates where, you knew people who lost loved ones and you had those kinds of impacts. Here, there wasn't much of that at all. Kids were still playing their sports. There were some measures in place, but, life was close enough to normal that you didn't feel as sort of claustrophobic as you did in other provinces, at least. So as data comes in, we start to see what happens to the infection rates when vaccinations hit certain tipping points. And right now, it seems as though when vaccination rates hit about 50%, you start to see infection rates go down, which is really, really promising. So I start to drill down in some of those data areas. There's some really promising looking findings that I've been able to find, which is pretty cool.
What have you guys come up with a number at all? Like where that tipping point is?
Well, so 50% is the closest one that I can find, but again, it's imperfect, right? Because the data is just forming. So we're kind of scanning all the different bodies in the world that are generating data that help us understand this. The last one that I found it's in the States. It was, I think, a study that happened between December to March or around there. And they had a number of people vaccinated in frontline workers. So frontline workers in hospitals, healthcare workers, people that would normally have a higher propensity to be exposed to the virus and be infected, right? So they did a study, and they literally did a placebo and a vaccine across, I think it was the Pfizer and Moderna, the two that were tested, and the infection rates that you could see, because you've got a control group. So you get people who are vaccinated in the same circumstances as the control group, as the other group who are not vaccinated. Some are vaccinated, some are not. I can't remember the first one I started with. So you got a control group. And then you can measure the infections that occur between both groups after they've been vaccinated. And it looks as though, even though the goal of a vaccine is not to stop the initial infection, it does reduce the viral load, which reduces transmission, which hopefully reduces the infectiousness of the disease. And it looks as though people who have been vaccinated are dramatically less likely to reinfect others, which is really, really promising.
Yeah, because I think a common misconception is that, and you still hear it in the news media, is that the vaccine prevents you from getting the virus.
Right.
And that's, as I read this,
or giving.
Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of the logical path that I think everyone misses is, as I understand it again, the vaccine basically helps you create antibodies to fight the virus if you get it, thereby lowering the expectation that you'll have a more severe physical reaction, require hospitalization, and unfortunately, tragically, potentially death.
Yeah. I'm not a doctor or I do data, right? So, but my understanding, Mel, is identical to yours.
Yeah.
It is that, it helps the body create the antibodies and fight it off. So when the virus actually comes in, you can fight it off and reduce the risk of one of the worst outcomes. That's how I sort of interpret it.
And me as a layman, sitting in, Northern Virginia, it just pains me when you see so-called experts hopping up on the TV screen and saying, yeah, get vaccinated and you're good to go 100%. You won't get it. You won't spread it. I mean, to me, that's kind of a miscarriage of science. And I know I'm going way out of my lane and off course and all that kind of stuff, but
I mean, we're all trying to kind of learn. So being a data guy, I think in terms of probability almost all the time. And it's become almost like I've almost over-rotated in that sense, but I always think in terms of probability.
Sure.
So the way that I think of it is, if I get the vaccine, I have a much lower probability of a bad outcome. That's one. And that tells me something about whether or not I want to take the vaccine. That's one. The second thing is, what the data seems to start to show, and this is all very early days, but early indicators, the study that I looked at, and I kind of sought it out because I was curious, the data does suggest that even though you're right, it doesn't eliminate you from getting the virus. In fact, you'll get it. in some way, if you're exposed to it, the virus will, that's what it does. It tries to find a new host, but it does reduce the probability that you will infect someone else. And you can almost think of it in terms of like a bad outcome means you're coughing and sneezing and all of a sudden your droplets are in the air, creating higher risk for people around you. Again,
Yeah.
probability. If you only have mild symptoms and it's only for a short period of time, it's less likely that you will infect someone else, even though you do have the virus.
I think you hit on a key point there. And sorry, I said I wasn't going to do this, but I'm doing it anyway. A reduction of the viral load means, in my mind, if I cough or put droplets in the air, there's less virus in those droplets than if I'd not been vaccinated and had COVID.
That feels,
Yeah, it feels like
is that's
sorry.
right.
Okay,
I
I'll
don't
shut
know.
up.
Look, I'm not a, but my intuition is that that's like I would have the same intuition, right?
I've looked at what you guys do, and I always like talking to really smart people about what they're passionate about, and then trying to see how that relates to us.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, because I am a little bit of a selfish bastard as well, and
course.
how we can all help each other.
Yep.
Okay, we've got that on tape now.
Perfect.
You can use that against me forever.
Damn right.
But looking at some of what you guys do, and a phrase really stuck out to me was that, and you talked about it a little, or you alluded to it earlier, that you guys are data driven, and you take a look at data driven behavioral risk to identify risk factors, bad actors, and all of the above. Is there a way to utilize that for in-person situations? So you can maybe ID, and relating this to COVID, is there a way you can ID, certain individuals who may have a higher propensity to have it, or have a higher propensity for a false negative test, based on, you touched on your groups of information, your regionality, if you will, and finding that, and then, maybe separating them out so they get a deeper test, so they can still attend the event in person.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Sort of, yeah. It's a really interesting and fascinating topic. I have two lines of thought on that. If you'll sort of familiar, because I think about security in a general sense, right? Like when I say find bad guys with math, that goes from finding people who are going to steal your data right up to finding someone who wants to cause physical damage, right? In my previous life at IBM, I worked with our CTO at the time to create a natural language processing engine to measure sentiment in social media, for example, because you can use that as a prediction of someone's propensity to cause damage or versus go out and have a good time, right? So when you think about using analytics to figure out if there are potential risks in your group, that's an obvious place because people publish a lot of information in the open space. In fact, there's a company out there that I was thinking about this the other day it's called Shadow Dragon. It's probably worth you guys kind of taking a look at them. They aggregate all the searches across all different sources of information out there that's publicly available. So it's not as if it's not breaking the law or anything like that, but it uses different mechanisms to get information, including from the darknet, in areas where people might congregate and share information that you would not normally see, which might be a really interesting way to identify potential bad actors in your geographic area. That's kind of the physical security side. The COVID side is really interesting. So what you're trying to do, I'm just going to rephrase the question to make sure that I kind of think through it properly. What you're trying to do is focus your testing energies on higher risk individuals. Is that how you would net out kind of the goal?
Yeah, we all have an understanding that the tests, especially the rapid tests, the ones that come back in 15 minutes, have a much larger percentage of false negatives.
Right. So people who are positive, but still test negative.
Yes. So because of specificity or whatever, however the test was designed.
Your previous guest was talking about that. I had a good listen, a good episode about that.
Exactly. So we've and one of the things that Ron discussed was is there a way to find out who those people are, then you can segment them to give them a deeper test, so that say out of 100 people you've got 30 or 40 that have the propensity for a
Yeah.
false negative,
Yep.
you pull those out. And so you've still got, okay, we have 35
Yep.
that are actually negative, but
Right.
these 5 we don't want to go in and expose to everybody. So combine that with the growing vaccination rate,
Yep.
we can open up stuff much more quickly, and have everybody be safe and get back to the things they love to do, whether it's concerts, whether it's
Yeah.
eating fair food,
Yeah.
all of that stuff.
Yeah. So the way that we would tackle that is we would start to think about, like, and it's a conversation, right? There's no magic behind it. When you do a data science exercise, you're trying to think of the characteristics that would cause high risk, right? So what might those be? Well, someone who's not vaccinated, so you could probably scan social media to figure out if someone's vaccinated. People tend to publish that stuff. That's one thing you could capture, right? Everybody does.
Pet peeve.
Yeah, but they do. The data's there, right?
With or without pictures.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. The second thing is people who tend to be not vaccinated and congregate in large social environments with no measures, that increases the likelihood that they would be the carrier of the virus. So in data science, we would effectively ask a number of these questions and then go look for data that tells us whether someone is likely to be in that group, using a probability score. So from an analytics perspective, we would literally, you could sit there and you could graph it out on a spreadsheet. You could say this variable, which is vaccinated, yes or no, that, puts someone in a different group.
Right.
Because as we discussed, if they're vaccinated, the likelihood that they'll spread the virus is lower. So you shouldn't waste your precious resources on lower risk individuals, right? Then the next one becomes if they are heavily active in social circles. So you could search and look for signals, doing some, basic natural language processing searches. And then based on the findings, come back with a score that says this person on a scale of 1 to 10 is, an 8 on the social interaction mode, which is they're going out every night at the club. Well, that's a higher risk individual, not vaccinated, high social interaction score, higher risk individual, more testing emphasis.
Is
You would
that
do that.
also something that is, from what you're describing, and again, not being any kind of scientist or mathematician, but is that a prime application for putting AI into that?
So possibly not. And
Okay.
the reason I say that is because there's an expression that a really good friend of mine who's also in the security space used to say, is the juice worth the squeeze?
With the squid, yeah.
Right? So it's a great expression. I love it. So the question becomes, are you going to save enough effort using an AI technique to make the cost of the AI implementation worthwhile, right?
Gotcha. Because with AI, you still got to teach it something, right?
You do. You get not only teach it, but you've got to find the data. It's not easy.
Yeah.
You've got to clean the data. You've got to test to make sure that you're measuring the right things.
Gotcha.
It's hard to do. Like, it's funny, in the cybersecurity space, I've been doing this now for about 8 years, being in analytics before in IBM Watson. And when I go around the country, and the country being the US, I used to do like cyber shows all the time. And I used to do presentations on, AI and cybersecurity. And, the expectation of what AI can and can't do is dramatically out of whack. Like, people think that, machines are about to become self-aware and take over the world, like Skynet from Terminator's coming in. And it's not. Like, it's not. AI can do amazing things, but machines are dumb. A good friend of mine likes to say, artificial intelligence is very artificial and not very intelligent.
Well, so I was keying in on the artificial word, and
Yep.
I guess my analogy is, even as humans, we have to learn in order to process.
Yeah, that's right.
That's where I trail behind.
That's right. But what humans do, that machines can't, is we can generalize the concept that you learn in a situation here, generalize the concept, and then apply it here. A really silly example that I used to use in my talks when I used to give them is, when I was a kid, I jumped off my house with a garbage bag as a parachute.
Oh, you did that
Thought
too?
parachutes look really cool.
I
I learned something that day.
Fortunately, our house is only one story, so it wasn't that bad.
Same here, exactly the same. So, but I vividly remember. I can picture the sky when it happened, the whole thing. Like, I vividly remember. But my friend Luke, he watched me, And then, he had encouraged me to go first, by the way. He was a smart guy.
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah. And then as far as I know, he's been successful in avoiding making that mistake ever since. And I was also able to infer that I shouldn't jump off a bridge or a bit tall building, right? Humans are good at doing that.
Right.
The machine would only know it can't jump off of my house with that bag, right? So machines can't generalize a concept and apply it. Humans are dramatically better at that than machines as of yet. In time, machines may get there, but we are years away from anything close to that. So when you think about an AI application, the reason I bring all that up is because people need to understand that an AI application is not like a magic box where you just ask it a question and an answer gets spit out. Like, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
Like, other than Watson's advertising?
Well, so I use that example all the time. And the funny thing is I worked at IBM at the time, and I knew some of the people who worked on that application. That was brilliant. Like, it was an amazing engineering feat. Okay. They had great technologies, great artificial intelligence, machine learning, NLP processing, all stacked together to perform that specific function. And it was eerie. Like, my folks were like, holy crap, this is like, it's behaving like a human. It's really
Eyes of the machines.
Yeah, exactly. But as you'll know, and if you scan the news, it didn't take over the world. In fact, there were some problems with, some of those technologies and being overpromised. And that's what I've seen in cybersecurity. I think a lot of companies overpromise what it can do. It'll find all your threats. You can just go back and kick back and have a coffee. You're fine. It just doesn't work that way. And the reason I bring that up here is because in your context, in the context of physical security, what you want to do is you want to make reasonable efforts to identify the top threats and the things that you can let go. And everything in the middle, still best served by a good old human, interpretation than trying to create a big AI machine to kind of solve everything at the top and the bottom.
I think that's really important in the context of, as you say, what people expect, kind of preconceived notions about what AI can do as opposed to what it can't. And that it's still going to take good old fashioned data collection, human effort, human analysis, and making some wild ass guesses.
Yeah. I mean, look, a probability is a probability. Like predictive analytics, it doesn't predict what's going to happen. It predicts what it expects based on a score. And then what actually happens could be anything. And it'll either fit within that curve or it'll be out of whack.
Right.
Right.
It's data driven.
It is 100%.
Yeah.
So in the aggregate, it's very useful because we can make decisions about what we can do as a society based on vaccination rates. And that's great. Personally, selfishly, I'm also a selfish bastard, PJ. I want to get out there and have some fun. I'm tired of this. This is exhausting, right? So I'm watching for the signals. I'm trying to learn from other geographies in the aggregate to see what works and what I can project out that we will be able to do later on in the summer.
Well, I think that's a fantastic segue into kind of the where I think we can discuss next is we all have it. It's just crisis fatigue.
Oh my God.
We know it's real and how we're dealing with it. I mean, how do you guys, our neighbors to the north here, what is more important? And is it on an individual basis? Is it individual freedom or the collective good?
Yeah.
Where do we go? I mean, everyone's got crisis fatigue, lockdown fatigue, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And how are people handling it north of the border and where we are?
Yeah. So, I mean, I tell you that everyone's tired. Everyone's getting really cranky. Like just seeing like on social media, like I've taken myself out of some circles because there's some people who are just getting very aggressive and it's just not healthy. It's not helping anything.
Yeah, I'm not sure those are limited to your circles.
Yeah, I know.
Like on the nightly news.
Oh,
Jesus.
100%. It's
we don't want to go there anyway. You were saying
it's exhausting. We're all the same. I mean, we're a social species, man. We like to connect. We like to hang out. That's what, Ray Dalio. I don't know if you know who Ray Dalio is. One of my favorite authors. He talks about meaningful work and meaningful relationships is like the two key things to make life worthwhile. Relationships is one of two. It's massive. It's huge. And I miss my friends. I miss my extended family. So I'm exhausted as well. And PJ, you raised an interesting point about kind of individual freedom versus collective good. And you can sort of see the tug from both sides, right? Because you can see purists from both extremes being really agitated when the actions that are being taken are somewhere across the continuum. And of course, the US has been founded on like individual liberty as like such a founding core principle that I can just imagine how, what's the word? I guess crazy that the debate might be. But, on the extreme edge of that, you could say, well, if, my individual liberty means that I should be able to take my car and go drive 200 miles down the highway, and that's my choice, then we make some choices as a society that certain things we do are for the collective good. So it's like somewhere in the middle is usually where the truth lies, which is a boring answer. Fence sitting, I guess, typical Canadian.
Well, no.
Now, see, Mario, we don't do politics here, so there's no fence sitting.
Perfect. All right, cool.
Yeah,
Well,
you're either to the right or the left. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But by the same token, you bring up choices,
yeah,
and there's another kind of factor in that now, and that is you can make a personal choice, but now you have to factor in risk,
right.
which is, again, over the last now, 14, 15 months, the only risk that we've really had to factor in is for where I'm going, do I have enough money when I get there? Do I have enough gas in the car to get there? Now it's, do I have my mask? Do I have my disinfectant? Am I going to be around a crowd of people? Am I going to catch COVID and die?
Yep.
And again, going back to the whole, crisis fatigue, that has increased in my mind the exhaustion which everybody feels about this whole thing.
Agreed. I mean, again, I think in terms of probabilities. So, and we all do intuitively. Like when you step outside, right? You always, make a choice that's more likely to get you what you're looking for on that given task, right? So for me, I think
we may not assign a number to it. You might.
That's right. But really, if you think about data science, it's an extension of that same exact concept.
Yeah,
which is really cool when you sort of make that connection. So you're trying to make an educated guess, and educated being the key word. Is it a guarantee? No, life is not a guarantee, but it's always a guess that's educated by your experience, your knowledge, and your awareness of what risks are out there. Some people will put their head in the sand and choose to ignore risks that are out there, their own personal choice. Or you can acknowledge them and acknowledge that you want to make a different choice because maybe the benefit of something you want to do that's risky outweighs the risk. I used to take motorcycles on the racetrack. It's risky.
Oh, yeah.
Some people die. And I did it for a while, not after I had kids, but for a while I did. And I remember towards the end, I can remember thinking, you know what, the risks are outweighing the benefits for me right now, so I'm going to stop.
Well, your sense of mortality is inversely proportional to the number of kids that you have,
and your age, as it turns out. When you're young,
actually, yes, because I love this particular phrase. I don't consider birthdays for celebration anymore. I consider them a countdown.
Yeah. So for me, like, I'm tired too. I mean, my family and I, we moved from Ottawa in Ontario to Nova Scotia, Eastern Canada, to be near our family. We bought a house sight unseen. So you want to talk about risk and kind of be very conscious of the risk. We bought a house on the internet with a virtual tour.
How'd you crunch those probability numbers?
Well, what I came down to is I did a prioritization of the key considerations of a decision. And fundamentally, it came down to, given our world right now, do we want to be closer to our extended family, our aging parents, so that we can actually spend some time with them in this world? And at that time, there was an Atlantic bubble. So the 4 Atlantic provinces were bundled together so you could travel across provinces.
Yeah.
Because there was almost no infections here. They did a great job of keeping infections low. In the end, that part of the equation didn't turn out to pay off because the bubble since burst and provinces had had some flare-ups. But at the same time, we made micro decisions within that big, crazy action to reduce the risk, like buy a house that's almost new as opposed to an older house, and buy in a very established neighborhood and cross-check neighborhood with friends. Like you take all these actions to mitigate the risk. And I think the same thing applies to our daily decisions. But having said all that, I'm with you. I'm exhausted. I need this to end. I want to go back to see my family. I want to go back to traveling. I miss work trips. I miss going out and seeing my colleagues halfway across the country, across the pond. I miss that.
I mean, I've only been on an airplane once this year, and last year, even 3 months after the thing started, I was flying every week.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely miss that.
Yeah.
So I mean, kind of take a look, in your crystal data ball, and do you see? It doesn't have to be clear because nobody's clear.
Yeah.
Do you see how we do get back to a normal life, or are we there now?
No, I don't think we're there now. Maybe you guys are closer than we are because you guys are vaccinating more aggressively than we are. And I think that's the key characteristic in the calculus to make a prediction. So I think you guys are closer. I don't think you're there. I think you're closer.
Yeah, I think you might be right about that.
The way I see things shaken out is I think different geographies are going to experience different things based on the vaccination rates. I think that's the key determination because I think vaccination rates are going to, for better or for worse, reduce infection rates and reduce bad outcomes. So once you can get to a point where a given population has a much lower risk of a bad outcome, then you can open up. So the US looks to be on track to do that. UK and Israel are two other countries overseas that are doing well there as well. We're right behind you, so we might be a month or two behind you. I think at that point, you might see North America becoming closer to normal with some variations. Like, I don't think it's going to be all the same. I think you see a lot of mask wearing, and I didn't want to talk about masks. I think you'll keep seeing that. I was in Japan in December of 2019, and people there are still wearing masks from SARS. Remember SARS?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yep.
People in Japan are still wearing masks from that. Like, the habits haven't gone away. So there's that element of, like, culturally, you'll sort of continue to see that to a certain extent, I think.
No,
what I think will happen is different.
And they had kind of been I just noticed the prevalence of masks over there. And when I was working there in 2006 was,
Yep.
I'd see people all the time wearing masks and going, what is this? Well, unfortunately now I get it. So
Yeah, I asked some questions when I was there too, because I was like, is there something going on? They said, no. They said it's cultural, it's a courtesy.
Yep.
If you're not feeling well, you wear a mask to reduce the risk of you passing on whatever you've got to someone else. So Japan being culturally very focused on the collective good, there's a big element of that. So culturally, it kind of makes sense if you think about it.
totally.
I don't know if it's the same across Asia Pacific, other countries. I suspect not as much as Japan, but I could be wrong.
I think I found when I was traveling in the Far East, I think I found it more prevalent in Japan than any place, like Korea, Singapore,
Yeah.
even China.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. But I think different pockets of the world will be slower to come online. Then the risk becomes variants and, resistance of vaccines from the variants. So I think we'll start to see, my suspicion is that we'll start to see kind of COVID vaccines becoming similar to the flu vaccine in that
Yep.
you've got to do some of it to get enough herd immunity that it doesn't kind of spread and cause bad outcomes. So I kind of see that becoming a thing. But again, I'm not a doctor or a epidemiologist, so I could be wrong. But that's what I think is coming.
Yeah, and all this is just fascinating to me, and I want to circle back to, and we go down these rabbit holes all the time because it gets so fascinating.
Yeah.
Just to learn new stuff. I want to get back to kind of the overall challenges to kind of our bread and butter.
Yep.
Which is the live event world.
Yep.
I understand we can't use AI or specified boxes or robots or whatever to, point at someone and say, RoboCop, you're coming with me.
Well, unless you can get a robot to play guitar and drums, that would be fine.
Well, you can do that, but that's just not good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Like, my instinct is that the science behind testing is likely to continue to improve. And that might be your most cost-effective way to do it. You'd have to pass on the cost, of course, to someone, be it the end customer, the attendee, or the promoter. I can envision an AI system to do something like this, but I think unless you did it at scale, whereas you kind of build up like a platform centrally located and deploy the same platform to thousands of events, then the cost per event goes down. That'll be one way that you consider doing it. But you'd have to have an organization that's willing to fund the upfront costs of building out that infrastructure, getting the data science in, collecting the data based on a hypothesis. The way we think of, so when I do a startup, I always think about it in terms of a hypothesis. So you have an idea. I think if we do this, this will work. You want to test it before you invest heavily, because otherwise you might do a whole bunch of work for like zero benefit, and that's no good. So you want to test drive the idea. So you want to go to experts that say, okay, like, could we potentially, use these kinds of inputs to gauge the probability of someone to be a spreader? And then and then talk through some of the examples that you and I talked about, which are, are they vaccinated? Do they have a propensity to be very social? Do they live in a building that's more dense, right? You could actually take attributes. There's probably another half dozen attributes that I'm not thinking of it right now, but you get together with, data scientists, array data scientists, and subject matter experts, which are, you guys, and potentially a few other folks who could think in terms of, like doctors who could think in terms of infection rates, infection likelihood, and think through those attributes, and then try to create a predictive model that would take someone and try to scan social media, publicly available information to bring back a score. And then would that score be worthwhile? So it is not impossible. You can't, like you said, there's no RoboCop available to just kind of have a, look at someone and give you an answer. But if you wanted to use a kind of a science-based approach to predict, it could give you a potentially higher hit rate, success rate, than just doing kind of randomized testing.
Well, the interesting thing about that too is with each and every event that you do, I mean, given the people that you're scanning, for lack of a better term, you're now building a database that is even more based in real world data than assumptions. So with each and every event, and this may be oversimplifying it, which that's what I do. Because as you grow these events, the more data that you pull in, the better your analytics are going to project predictably outcomes.
You might hit some privacy issues though, right?
That's a good point.
Because we hit that all the time, because when we do insider threat programs, when we talk to customers, whenever someone does a real insider threat program, they typically have to have a real governance structure around it, which means that it's a committee that might include human resources. It might include legal. It might include cybersecurity and a few other.
There are those damn lawyers again.
Well, because otherwise, right, it's subject to abuse if you've got like one person who's got kind of the finger on the pulse of everything. So in Europe, it's a lot more stringent, a lot less stringent in the US. Typically, you kind of sign your privacy away when you sign an employment agreement, so you can look. But when you get into sort of social media stuff, there is an element of kind of big brother and fear that does apply.
Hey, we hear your dog.
You do hear my dog. I told you.
So we want to keep this light and entertaining. I mean, people have pets. And
absolutely, we do.
Pets are good for COVID fatigue. Anyway,
I wonder how many COVID pets that have been acquired or rescued in the last year.
So I'll just tell you, the rescue folks in my neck of the world, there are no more for rescue. They have all been rescued.
Yeah.
They're gone. I mean,
I'm right there. Our puppy, we got a puppy in March last year. We were toying with it, but it was a COVID puppy.
There you go. The COVID puppy. It's now a breed. Oh my gosh. Mario, anything you want to plug about the stuff that you do? And again, we'll put some links in our podcast announcement. And links, but I find this field fascinating. And I think anybody that's alive right now is going to find it fascinating as well, because there's just so much to talk about.
Yeah, sure. So a couple of things. We're starting our own podcast called Humans and Machines.
Oh, perfect. This is robots.
That's right, exactly. Well, so the funny thing about that is my mental model is much less Terminator, much more Marvel. Like, we want to create augmented humans with the power of AI, helping humans be better, faster, stronger. not physically, but making decisions. So that's the way that I think of it. And that's why for me, physical security and cybersecurity needs to be more integrated. I was talking to a good friend of mine about securing nuclear sites for small nuclear reactors, small modular reactors. That's becoming a thing.
Yeah.
And, they need to be very cost effective. Otherwise it doesn't work. And for that, you got to secure the physical and the virtual side of things. And so for me, virtual and physical security do mix in somewhere around insider threat in that realm. I think it does. And I think our two fields need to collaborate way more than we have been so far. So I'm excited for more of these conversations and to see what we can do in the future.
Superb. This has been fascinating. And I think our listeners, there's a lot of takeaways in this. And if they didn't get, 3 or 4 of them, then I won't go off the rails and say bad things about them.
Well, that's good. I really enjoyed it, by the way. These are great conversations. Thank you so much for having me on.
Mario, it was absolutely a thrill to have you on. Thanks for taking the time to come out. You guys check out Mario's podcast that's out there that he just talked about. If you are interested in live events, production, securing them, whatever, you can reach us at www.arcusgrp.com. That's ARCUSG as in George, Robert Paul.com. And we'd love to talk to you about what you're doing going forward. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
It's been a thrill, and I love these conversations.
We really appreciate your time. Good luck. God bless. Stay safe.
Yep. Same to you. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Mario.